Hi, I'm Calvin Cherry. How did a vampire epidemic influence one of the greatest Gothic horror novels ever written? And how does it tie in with my Dracula prequel, Stoker, Evolution of a Vampire? I dare you to watch on to find out. Most people will tell you vampires are a myth and just a figment of our nightmares, brought on by our own pop culture fascination of the undead through books, movies, and television. However, few understand that for centuries, such folklore was grounded in the belief system of almost every culture and considered serious business. Over the ages, thousands of suspected cadavers have been disposed of with vampire-killing remedies. Incredibly, these are not all bygone tales passed down between generations. Indeed, here in the 21st century, reports of vampire activity continue to circulate. In 2002, the African village of Malawi had a vampire panic, which resulted in a man being stoned. In 2006, a grave was discovered in Venice, Italy, of a skeleton with a brick shoved in its mouth due to a chewing dead legend. In 2013, the Greek islands of Lesbos and Kamani have been nicknamed Vampire Islands because graves are being discovered with stakes driven through their bodies. In 2016, a man in Texas was executed for killing and drinking the blood of a 12-year-old boy. And in 2020, there are known modern-day vampires living in New Orleans and San Francisco that drink the blood of willing donors. In the mid-1890s, there was a massive vampire scare in New England. Dating back to 1859, Vermont and Rhode Island residents feared the dead were preying on the living. During this time period, consumption, or tuberculosis, claimed 2% of the entire population. Families were digging up their own loved ones to burn their hearts. The widespread belief was that those that succumbed to consumption will rise from their graves at night and suck the blood of their family until they too died of consumption. The vampire plague claimed the disposal of entire communities. Though there are countless stories of families that suffered through this period, the most infamous is probably that of Mercy Brown of Exeter, Rhode Island. Mercy's mother, Mary Eliza Brown, died of consumption in December of 1883. Mercy's sister, Mary Olive, died of consumption 6 months after their mother. Mercy's brother, Edwin, then fell ill, followed by Mercy herself. So Mercy passed away of consumption. However, ongoing pressure from the village forced the exhumation and desecration of Mary Eliza, Mary Olive, and Mercy Brown's graves in an effort to save Edwin and stop the village vampire. Because Mercy died when the ground was frozen, she appeared asleep and her organs looked fresh. Her heart and liver were grotesquely torn from her body, burned into ashes, and the remnants made into a remedy that was given to Edwin Brown to drink. He died of consumption 4 months later. So how could such a thing happen, especially amongst well-known, well-to-do, intelligent Christian people? To begin with, there was not a lot known about consumption or tuberculosis during this time period. Its symptoms were very much like the characteristics of a vampire, often depicted in ancient folklore, such as pale skin, emaciated face, loss of appetite and weight loss, blood around the mouth and garments due to the constant coughing up of blood, fatigue, sleeping heavily during the day but being awake during the night, Secondly, the spreading of the disease was greatly misunderstood. It was carried through the air by coughing and sneezing, so one family member could pass it on to another. Carrier B could go on a while without showing symptoms until Carrier A had passed away, providing the notion that Carrier A had risen from the dead and fed on Carrier B. Moreover, much was misconstrued when it came to the decomposition of a body. Gases from a corpse could build up, giving off misguided beliefs of audible signs of movement. Hair and nails can continue to grow after death. Likewise, depending on the environment in which the corpse was buried, the body could be well preserved and slow to decomposition. And in extreme cases, the right conditions could cause the cadaver to be mummified. After the Mercy Brown incident, states began to pass laws to protect against grave desecration. There are closely to 100 documented cases of vampire disposal in New England, with new ones continuing to appear. Vampire graves turned up as recently as 1990 when young boys playing at a gravel mining area in Griswold, Connecticut, discovered the grave of a man that was staked to his coffin and other remains where the decapitated heads were placed in between the legs and bones forming a cross. So Bram Stoker was in New York on tour with the Lyceum Theater Company, winter of 1896, a year before Dracula was published. An article from the New York World newspaper dated Sunday, February 2nd, 1896, was cut out and affixed to his working notes on Dracula. The title, Vampires in New England, Dead Bodies Dug Up and Their Hearts Burned to Prevent Disease, Strange Superstitions of Long Ago. The old belief was that ghostly monsters sucked the blood of their living relatives. The entire clipping would take around 15 minutes to read, so I will summarize by saying there are references to Charles Darwin, vampire bats, and oddities in science that work their way into Professor Abraham Van Helsing's dialogue with Dr. Seward. It is clearly apparent this newspaper clipping influenced Stoker's masterpiece, particularly Lucy Westendra's rising from the grave at night and sucking the blood of young children. The Bloofer lady's heinous happenings were even accounted for in her own newspaper accounts in the Westminster Gazette, titled A Hampstead Mystery. And just like the vampires in New England were disposed of, Lucy's grave was likewise desecrated, her corpse dismembered, and treated in a similar vampire-like defilement. Dracula's Guest, the deleted first chapter of Dracula, published separately after Stoker's death, spoke of a village. Men had died there and been buried in their graves, and sounds were heard under the clay. And when the graves were opened, so in haste to save their lives, and their souls, and here he crossed himself. Those who were left fled away to other places where the living lived, and the dead were dead, and not something. The 1896 article makes a reference to a story from Arabian Nights. In Chapter 3 of Dracula, Jonathan Harker writes, "This diary seems horribly like the beginning of Arabian Nights, for everything has to break off at cockcrow, or like the ghost of Hamlet's father." Let me tell you briefly of another terrible tale where a group of Romanian villagers dug up a recently buried man after the niece of the deceased stated her uncle was returning from the dead and had been drinking her blood several nights, actually displaying pierce marks on her neck to family and friends and complaining of weakness. A wooden stake was driven through the man, which reportedly had fresh blood around his mouth. The ashes of the heart were made into a potion and given to the girl to drink. She was cured. What is probably the most shocking piece of this terrible story is this occurred in 2004. Watch footage of this remarkable news program. I've got a link to it here. Finally, so how is this New England scare tied to my novel? My historical fictional prequel to Dracula follows the conceptualization of Dracula. All the research material Bram Stoker consulted, including his notes, were closely analyzed by myself, along with many more academic resources not yet available at the time Dracula was written. All this data was carefully woven into my book. Stoker Evolution of a Vampire merges the life and times of Bram Stoker with the history of Vlad the Impaler and vampire mythology. I address many other myths, unanswered questions, and lore which have surrounded Bram Stoker, Henry Irving, Vlad the Impaler, and the origins of Dracula since its publication. My novel is available at all online retail stores. If you go into a brick and mortar store and it is not available, they will be glad to order it for you. Finally, if you would like a signed copy, please private message me and I will be more than happy to oblige. So further reading, Bram Stoker's Notes for Dracula, a facsimile edition, annotated and transcribed by Robert 18 Bazang and Elizabeth Miller, published in 2008. As I've mentioned before, this book provides much insight into the thoughtful, thorough, and well-researched and organized mind of Bram Stoker. It is very difficult to read much of the author's handwriting, so having a facsimile of the notes on the left page and a transcription on the text on the right is extremely practical. Stoker's notes and the 3-column cutout of the New World Vampires in New England article is very reminiscent to the epistolary way Dracula was written, made up of diaries, letters, newspaper clippings, logs, transcriptions, etc. Secondly, A History of Vampires in New England by Thomas D. Agostino, published in 2010. This book is a fascinating look into the vampire epidemic in New England. It is well written and masterfully researched, going into detail often omitted from articles and programs devoted to the subject. It includes great illustrations by photographer Arlene Nicholson. And finally, Vampires Forensics, Uncovering the Origins of an Enduring Legend by Mark Collins Jenkins, published in 2010. This intriguing book not only investigates vampires-related excavations and case studies, but also the history of its lore and origins of its myth. So if you found this interesting, please like and subscribe to my channel so you can be informed of other videos just like this. Thank you so very much for watching. Now go take a bite out of life. I will see you next time. Goodbye, friends.